There's no place like the Cube.
Hey, I'm Darren.
And I'm Esther, and this is Second Sunday, a podcast about Black queer people finding, keeping, and sometimes losing faith.
One of the leading principles of the faith is that God is love. The folks that I had come into community with who showed me love the most were Black trans women and femmes. And so I started saying that God must be a Black trans woman, because the people who live on this planet, in this world, on this plane right now, who are embodying what we're so to believe is the most central part of God, are Black trans folks.
It's the way some folks probably just took a gasp for me.
You know, I've always hung my hat on this idea that we need to stop referring to God in general as anything human. That's always been a big area of contention for me. But yeah, I'm sure that one sent a couple folks.
Yeah, we didn't have a problem when God was in the image and likeness of men. Right? We didn't have a problem when the mass marketed, multiple produced, famous picture of Jesus in the brown robe was in the image of a specifically Scandinavian or Norwegian man.
I was about to say, we don't even have to start at man. Let's just start at white. Okay?
But the part where it's so important for us to realize that our vision of God comes from the people who show up for us. Like we see God through people, and you know, it may be parents, it may be church or spiritual leaders, but God is showing up in the peoples.
Exactly.
The voice that opened our show today was the Tre'vell Anderson, and they are an award-winning journalist, social curator, and authoress doing world-changing work around society and culture. Esther and I had a time with Tre'vell.
I have not laughed that hard in a long time, Darren. That was great.
Tre'vell comes on with all of the energy, and I love that. I love it.
They came through swinging. I mean, right? Just even from the clip, I was like, okay.
We should have started recording before we started recording. It was everything. As you may know by now, in this season of Second Sunday, we're talking with folks who've left the traditional ways we think about church. So in this episode, we get to hear how Tre'vell found community and navigated their identities while remaining a proud, self-proclaimed church queen.
My mother was a single parent. She was in the Army for 23 years. And when she was overseas, my grandmother would take care of us. I grew up as her shadow, so much so that my nickname when I was younger was Preacher Man. I was one of, you know, them videos that you see on TikTok of the little boy dressed in a three-piece suit preaching Tre'vell Dollar or somebody like that. That was me, okay? I could get them up out their seats, honey, all right? Everybody thought I would be in somebody's pulpit getting it together. And church was just like a big part of our life. And because I was a kid, and because I didn't really know too many people beyond family in Charleston, I just tagged along with my granny. She also had a radio show on the AM side of things that I would go on, and I would read out the Bible verses. I credit my grandmother for making me into a church queen, a title that I hold proudly to this day. I always say that the Black church is actually a deeply campy place and a deeply queer place. We were in one of those churches where my granny had a nice old hat, okay, that matched the shoes, it matched the shawl, it matched the briefcase of her Bible that week. You know what I mean? She would have that regular outfit, but then, you know, you got to change, okay, when you getting ready to preach. And so she would go in the back And she would have turbans that matched the color of her robes. That was super campy to me. The woman in the church who is doing entirely too much. You not slain in the spirit for real. You carry it. Even the ways in which the ushers would parade in from the front door. Come on now, the choreography, laughing to the right. Come on, why y'all playing in my face? So yeah, it was a deeply camp place, a deeply queer place, and yet also so restrictive in retrospect.
And part of that restrictiveness showed up when Tre'vell was really young, and it showed up as a form of conversion therapy.
There was a situation when I was 4 years old that resulted in a very much pray the gay away, seance type moment. I remember very little things from my childhood, but I remember that. And it quite literally was me in the middle of a circle and people one day after church, I'm trying to figure out why are we lollygagging? What's going on? Next thing I know, the lights are off, candles are lit, and I'm on the floor in the middle of a circle. Again, did not have language for what it was they thought they were casting out of me at the time. But in retrospect, I can see and say that they saw queerness in me and felt the need to pray it away or to try, because here we are. And so when I think about what queer existence looked like in my life at that time, there was nothing. And so, I was in my Sunday's best, honey, carrying on with the rest of them. I'd say I was in the church deeply maybe until about 14 or so. And then you start reading the Bible for real yourself, okay? And then you start seeing the church folks lying and stealing and talking about people behind it. You like, now, hold on now. I thought we were supposed to be living Christ. And this, I know what that means now for myself. And your behavior is not reflecting that. Something's off. And so I think I started consciously stepping away from that. Yeah, so I didn't begin to even think about queerness or transness as being terms or a possibility for me until I was in college. I was at school at Morehouse, and these other Black queer people had recognized in me what I was not able to recognize in myself and welcomed me into a space that truly, allowed me to blossom into my truth while also maintaining a relationship to that world and that Black church space that so many of us have these affinities toward. I tell this story in my book, which came out last year. I talk about how my time at Morehouse coincided with a shift in my own identity and my own articulation of how I wanted to show up in the world.
In 2010, during Tre'vell's sophomore year, Vibe magazine published an article titled "The Mean Girls of Morehouse," reporting on the appropriate attire policy introduced that year. The policy stated that students referred to as Renaissance men were not allowed to wear caps, do-rags, sunglasses, or sagging pants on campus or at college-sponsored events. But the part that really drew attention was the rule about women's clothing. No dresses, no tops, tunics, purses, or pumps. The vice president of student services was reported as saying that the entire policy was based on 5 students who are, quote, living the gay lifestyle that is leading them to dress in a way we do not expect in Morehouse men.
And I was this little young baby queer, barely beginning to dip my toe into the streets of Atlanta, Georgia, okay? And to be caught in these conversations literally on the corner of Brown Street on our campus, where other students were debating about whether or not this specific group of students were proper representations of our school because they were queer, transgender, non-conforming was really wild. Knowing what I knew right, was bubbling up within myself. Those are some of the first ultimately trans people that I saw and was in close connection with in some way, shape, or form. Didn't really know them because the majority of them were upper class people. There was something there. And I remember that kind of being like a catalyst for me to stand even more in my truth. I stopped wearing suits that year, which to do at an HBCU, specifically at Morehouse College, where these people are wearing 3 and 4 piece suits to class every day. It was a big deal because I also was a bad bitch, right? So I'm getting recognized in all these different ways. And there would be different events on campus where we are expected to dress up. And I would show up in not a suit, not in anything necessarily too femme, to be clear. I was still wearing pants and all of that stuff, but I would have a little cowl neck sweater or something. So just something with a little panache, you know, just a little something. And there was literally a situation in which a professor remarked to another professor who they did not know I had a great relationship with about why is he, I use he, him pronouns at the time, why is he wearing that? He's supposed to be getting honors. Why is he wearing that? Boop, 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 boop. The professor that this professor told it to ends up relaying this information to me, thinking that I would laugh about it, but it was not funny to me. And because I was a bad bitch, I reported her directly to the president. And I said, I find it wild that on a day that I am being honored, she's worried about what I'm wearing. The appropriate attire policy, I'm not. They didn't know it was a women's top, but they didn't know that. It's okay. And so, long story short, I end up meeting with the president. The president ends up making me, my professor mentor, and then the professor who said this thing, have a meeting, makes her apologize. And I said, next time, just mind your business, okay? But I just remember how the quote unquote mean girls and that article and what they navigated in that particular moment, in that very specific kind of environment, and being like galvanized to be like, you know what, y'all treating these people really wild right now, not knowing that there are others of us here. And maybe you wouldn't care. Maybe they didn't care regardless. But that's when I just really started trying to be my fullest self, trying to figure out the language that made sense for me at that time. And then finding the community, specifically other Morehouse students, right, who also were and are navigating this thing called gender and sexuality at this very specific moment in our lives.
As Tre'vell continues to navigate Morehouse, they find themselves reconnecting with the church several years after deciding to step away.
I think junior year, I was an RA by this point. As an RA, you sometimes do group activities for your residents. And one of my friends at that time was an RA in another building, and he wanted to do a Sunday church trip for everybody. And the residents was like, you gonna come to church with us? And I said, now hold on. But I ended up going. We ended up going to the service at Clark Atlanta University, right behind us. And it was wonderful and it was beautiful. And it was beginning of me recognizing that I could have whatever relationship to God and spirituality and religion that I wanted. It could be as simple as just going to church so that I could hear the Clark Atlanta choir because they used to eat up them songs. It could be that I wanted to hear some sermon or message. It could be none of that. And when I was in college, I really was able to just begin creating the life that felt right to me. Despite all of the foolishness, okay, that I was navigating as somebody coming into their queerness, eventually coming into their transness and non-binariness in this deeply masculine and toxic environment.
Ever feel like the wellness landscape is missing something and that conversations are very one-size-fits-all? And that the conversations don't necessarily apply to your experiences? Hi, I'm Dr. Cassandra Dunbar, the host of the Be Well Sis podcast. Be Well Sis explores everything from hormonal health to aging to relationships and everything in between. The Be Well Sis podcast is your home for insightful conversations with incredibly inspiring women from all walks of life. Join us every week and tune into an episode that is crafted to help you thrive physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. The Be Well Sis podcast is available wherever you get your podcasts. Be Well Sis.
As Tre'vell matures into their identity and how they show up in the world, they experience a profound breach of trust.
While I was in college is also when I was outed to my family. My mom was in the military, like I mentioned. She was stationed in Columbus, Georgia, outside of Atlanta. My grandmother was living with her at the time. My mother got a new duty station, and they decided that they were going to drive from Columbus to the new duty station. But my mom owned a house in Columbus, and she was a little nervous about the community. And so she wanted me to, every other week, drive down to Columbus to check on the house, make sure it was all right. And so they were stopping in Atlanta to give me the keys. And I met up with them at a gas station, random Shell gas station. I had on a yellow shirt, a pair of black shorts that actually hit my knees, okay? So I was doing the masculine thing, okay? Come on now. And then I had on a pair of red Tars, the little moccasin-looking fabric shoes. 2 weeks later, after that quick hi-bye with my mother and grandmother, I received a letter, a handwritten letter from my grandmother. And in that letter, she asks me if I'm gay. And this is the grandmother who was the pastor, by the way. She asks me if I'm gay. And she says, if you're gay, then you're going to hell. And that I have put you on a pedestal. The family has put you on a pedestal. And now that pedestal has a crack in it. I used to love and ride hard for my little sister. She said that I was no longer a good role model for my little sister, who would eventually come out as a lesbian. But she said I was not a good role model for her. And I got that letter and I was enraged, to say the least. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to write her back. Okay? So I got my little piece of laptop, okay, my Lenovo, okay? And I feverishly typed out a response of my raw emotions to my grandmother, okay? And I told my grandmother in that letter, I said, if I'm going to hell, I'm going to see you there. Because you did X, Y, Z, elemental P. I have seen this and this. I read the Bible. I went in. Because also now I am grown and I have my own relationship to this text that we have invested so much into, right? That she is using to say all of these other things. And so I write this letter back to her and I send it off. I send it off. And in the letter, I say, because this was a few weeks before Thanksgiving break, I say, I know you're going to show this letter to my mama. And so I'm just going to do y'all a favor and not come home for Thanksgiving. And I won't be home for Christmas either if y'all act the way I think y'all going to act. Right? At that point in time, I had been speaking to my mother at least once a week. Conversation stopped for at least a month or so. Thanksgiving comes and goes, and shortly before Christmas break, I get a call, random call from my mother, and I answer the phone and she says, I read the letter. You need to apologize to your grandmother, and I better see you at Christmas. Now, I was feeling my oats, right? So I say back to my mama, Christmas is potentially on the table. However, I'm not apologizing because you didn't see what she wrote to me. You got the response but you didn't see that which necessitated that response. So we go back and forth for a little bit. Ultimately, she says, you better have your behind home for Christmas. I go home for Christmas and it's not brought up. We never talk about me being queer through the point that my grandmother eventually dies some 8 years later. But that happened while I was in school and was another like catalyst point to where I was like, well, all right, girl, you basically done got these people off. You know what I mean? Like, you told them you ain't come off Christmas, which you did not do in my family, in my experience. And it really allowed me to stand on business and stand on my own. And so when you ask about where my state was then, it really was one of rebellion. I was like, God, this you, God? This is you? And eventually, and I would say this would be maybe 5 to 8 years later, I would, one, find a home in my non-binariness and in my transness. And I would come to realize the innate divinity within us as trans people. And that allowed me to really reconfigure a relationship to spirituality that made space for who I am and who I believe I'm supposed to be in the world.
Hi, I'm Jake Shears, and I want to tell you about my new podcast, Queer the Music, that uncovers the anthems that have dominated dance floors and shaped queer lives. I'll be unpacking a different track each episode to discover the fascinating stories and backgrounds to each tune with the help of my brilliant guests.
I had been advised by a media trainer to not come out.
Love to see every kind of person say, sucking on my titties, because we all have titties.
We got pelted, cups of water, tubes of toothpaste.
That's Queer the Music with me, Jake Shears. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
As Tre'vell became more comfortable in their own skin, they began to reconnect with their spirituality.
A lot of it was around just like research, looking for other examples of trans people moving through the world. I began to discover that queerness and transness is actually a deeply African experience, contrary to what I had been told. When I realized and found out that prior to colonization, so many cultures across the world not only had space for queer folks and trans folks especially, but that those folks were the conduits for religion, for spirituality, for healing. I said, now hold on, Lord. Okay, I hear you, I see you, you're doing something. Because I was able to take a lot of that like joy that I experienced in the church and figure out ways to tap into it outside of those walls. I remember being on the dance floor at a club. I was at Bulldogs, yes, in Atlanta. And I don't remember what was playing, but I just felt like a transcendent experience come over me. And I was like, this reminds me of God's tabernacle, honey. Okay? And it was then that I began to realize that church is actually a mindset, that you can experience revelation and the gospel literally backing that thing up on the dance floor at Bulldogs, right? Because I had not felt myself really, truly, right, before that moment. And I can't remember the song that was on the dance floor, but I just remember feeling so free. And I said to myself, I like this. This is what I want more of. This is what I think they were perhaps actually talking about when they talked about the transformative powers of God and faith and belonging to a particular type of community. And so since then, I've really been saying to myself that One of the leading principles of the faith that I was brought up into is that God is love. If we are to believe that God is love and that we are made in God's image, so therefore we are to be embodied versions of God, the folks that I had come into community with who showed me love the most were Black trans women and femmes. And so I started saying that God must be a Black trans woman, because the people who live on this planet, in this world, on this plane right now, who are embodying what we're so to believe is the most central part of God, are Black trans folks. Now, you can't say that in certain communities because people look at you weird and all of that. But really, throughout my entire journey, what I can say is that in the moments that I have felt the most alone, it has been knowing the truth of myself that has kept me going. And to me, God, the universe, spirit, whatever you call them, had to have something to do with that. Because there were so many times where, you know, it could have been what the songwriter said. Let me stop. I won't go there. But that's what comes to mind. I say that I'm Christian-ish. Like, that's the foundation. That's where I'm mostly coming from. But I don't really care what name you give the person that you're talking about, right? Whoever gets you to that promised land that we say we want to be in, listen, go for it. I call mine God, okay? But my God is also a Black trans woman, so do with that what you will. So yeah, I say Christian-ish, which is supposed to be very like asterisk, and that asterisk just means a whole lot of other stuff. I should start saying Christian plus, like LGBTQ plus. It's like there's a whole lot in that plus. I think the secret to the Black church as an institution sustaining and remaining or returning to some sort of meaningful relevance in our community lies within the queer folks and the trans folks who are interested in being in those spaces. And that's just because every major shift in society, for the better and some for the worst, have been at the hands and as a result of the brilliance of Black, queer, and trans people specifically.
Can you hear me now?
And I think so many of us recognize the possibility that lies within a relationship to a higher power. And many of us are finding that in different ways, right? Whether it's on the dance floor, whether it's in community at a book talk, whether it is volunteering someplace. But for the folks who find their callings, bringing them back to that staple, I think they are that secret sauce. They are the folks who need to be platformed. They are the pastors that I want to hear from. They are the theologians whose scholarship that I want to read more about, because at the core of at least my understanding of what this thing called being a Christian, God-fearing, etc. is supposed to be is having faith in the unknown. And how many of us as Black queer people, Black trans folk, are manifestations of faith? We are faith embodied. Black trans people, we have crafted ourselves out of the depths of our imaginations, right? And we show up. And the fact that we do, the fact that we exist, to me, is proof of some other power, some other influence, because ain't no way so many of us are able to be out here and navigate what we're navigating. To be clear, it's not cute out there, and yet we are here. And folks have remarked to me when I often tell the story of my journey that in so many ways I am, speaking to the people. I am preaching. I am bringing people together. And I used to think that it would be from a pulpit, but it's been through my writing, it's been through my speaking, it's been through my social media. And that's beautiful. And so I would tell my younger self that, yeah, it's coming. And yes, this is hard right now, but keep listening to yourself. You are going to figure out how to survive and navigate this space until you get to a point where you are able to truly blossom. And there's nothing wrong with that, because everything works together for your good, because you're a bad bitch. You just don't know it yet.
Wow. I mean, I do know that I'm a bad bitch, but I feel like I like it better when they say it.
And it's just like, yeah, because indeed, the world we're in is jacked up. And I still think we have a message, a gospel, an idea, a spiritual prompting that there still can be something better, that the worst of what we see and the worst of what's going on isn't all that there is. And so I love that. I love that the ways that Tre'vell is just like, listen, we gonna do this thing.
For me, it goes to show how the power of spiritual connection and seeking spirituality on your own exists in a lot of ways outside of other human beings, and how it really is a personal thing. Because I feel like we spend so long talking about the institution and the people that make it up that we forget that people feel things regardless of whether anyone is watching or not. So yeah, it was definitely important.
At the end of the day, the world needs us. The world needs you. There are so many things that come against us and they're trying to shut us down, tell us to be quiet, to tell us not to be so fabulous and so sparkly. But when we show up as our real selves, the ones who can handle the real, the ones who can keep it 100, they are going to find us, and we're going to build the best community ever. So as Tre'vell said, use a bad bitch. Keep that shit up and be blessed.
The Second Sunday podcast is hosted by Esther and Darren Calhoun. But podcasting is a team sport, so a big thank you to our dream team.
Our producers, Esther Ikoro, Anna DeShawn, and Nichole Hill. Our associate producer, Amber Walker.
Our sound designer, Florence Barrau-Adams, and our managing producers, Jocelyn, Gonzales, and Courtney Fleurantin.
Our opening theme song is Maya B's original track titled They Don't Know. You should download the full song today.
To learn more about today's guests or the show, visit our show notes on our website, secondsundaypod.com, and on Instagram @secondsundaypod. Second Sunday is a production of The Cube, spelled with a Q, in partnership with the PRX Big Questions Project, which is generously supported by the John Templeton Foundation and produced by PRX Productions.
The Cube is your #1 curated platform to discover the best BIPOC and QTPOC podcasts.
Support this show and more like it by joining the Cube app and follow the Cube across social media @the Cube app.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next episode.
From PRX.